I'm very pleased and excited to be back before you. We spoke a couple of different times in different meetings. I know a few months ago we were all together and talking about a situation where I was going to explore in an infant stage run at a statewide office for Ag Commissioner, and came to you to talk to you about all of the exciting change in statewide office turnover, the largest change in Texas history for our leadership and the future leadership for this state going forward. When the Senate vacancy happened and Tommy Williams decided to go to work for Texas A&M as a chancellor, my wife and I talked about it. I was walking doors in Odessa, Texas, finding out how big this state was, calling in homework to a fifth grader with some math help, and really thinking long and hard about the policy for conservatives and the grassroots movement, the policy that effectively lives or dies in the Senate in Austin through my experiences as a House member and all of the successes and also a lot of the challenges that I saw where liberals and Democrats and moderate Republicans, true to the establishment, were effectively overrunning the conservative voices. And time again, when we would get our victories in the House, the Senate would not come through. So with much prayer and consideration, we decided to serve closer to home, and I'm excited to be here to talk to you about how important this Senate race is and SD4 is for the economy of Texas, for the future of this state, and as we see all the chaos that's going on in Washington and how miserable of a failure we have for a president 7 years into a term, 2 terms for this nation, where President Putin is laughing. China and Iran are laughing at America as we have driven ourselves from, at the national level, across this planet from a reputation that was gold to what we find today, which is so many failures and letdowns from the Obama administration. We have Nancy Pelosi writing amicus briefs to influence the outcome of the United States Supreme Court on whether or not individuals and business owners and employers should violate their own religious and compromise their own constitutional rights and their own religious liberties to force Obamacare on those employers and those individuals with the contraceptive issues that we're hearing about. And as the Democrats say, that we're, again, conservatives are at war against women. And this country is at a crossroads. We have Pelosi submitting amicus briefs, we have Obama failing us across the world, and we have Eric Holder attacking Texas in every single possible way through the EPA fighting our voter ID laws and trying to effectively make sure that Obamacare, which is the greatest threat to our economy and the success of Texas and the success of this nation, completely gets into effect where we can do nothing about it. And a lot of these things are happening now, but a lot of these liberal policies, these entitlement policies, these attempts to affect our culture in ways that can be devastating for our nation, they're not new stories. We just have new issues of the times. And so much of this is why I originally decided to offer myself for public service in the first place. Many of you, I know me personally. Many of you only know me as a Montgomery County State Representative. I know many of you have seen my Facebook and looked at my voting record and looked at me from the standpoint of what can you find on the web. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about me personally, because I think that goes to the heart of who you are effectively hiring to lead this state and to lead the effort of the grassroots conservative movement and to continue to help build the Patriot PAC, not with success across this county, but with success across this state. So when I was growing up, my parents were both from this area. They didn't have the opportunity to go to college and finish college. They both went to work to support a family. And I learned my true grit and my fight through my mother and my father. My dad, obviously, as a lot of little boys, was a hero of mine, and he was a giant to me in so many ways. He was the strongest, softest guy you'd ever meet at the same time. He had a big heart, but he was a very, very tough individual. And I've talked to many of you at some point or another about how financial difficulties with my family led me to basically be on my own for putting myself through college and through advanced education and from there forward. But I wanted to give you an example of a story about my dad that will effectively correlate with why I ended up running for public service in the first place. My dad was in real estate and ranching, just like I am now. He was an entrepreneur and a job creator and a risk taker, and had many successes. But during the 80s real estate crunch, with the S&L fallout and the RTC, the arm of the federal government that basically seized properties and went after a lot of the cleanup for what effectively happened during that downturn. My dad, during that process, like many risk takers and entrepreneurs, lost everything. And he had a judgment against him, effectively handed down by the RTC in seizing property that he owned. And there was about a $700,000 or an $800,000 judgment. And he was so proud, he would never take a bailout. He would never file for bankruptcy. He continued to try to fight and claw his way out of it as he supported our family and his kids, and wanted every opportunity for them going forward, that opportunities that he didn't have. So he because the federal government had it set up to seize 100% of his income, no matter what dollar he made, to effectively take care of that judgment that the federal government had over him, there was no incentive, and he was very depressed over it. He went into a hermit status and felt like he could not support his family and his kids, and it broke him. It broke his spirit. It broke the spirit of a giant. And I always wanted and felt an obligation to try to return a sentiment to him that he never knew he had instilled in me. Hard work, relying on my faith, making sure I had a never say die attitude. Many of the things that I saw him broken by those standards, yet he had instilled that in me as the next generation. And I helped him with that spirit. As I paid my way through college as a pipe fitter for a chemical plant, which was terribly difficult, hot work, fireproof coveralls, 3 stories up in a pipe rack, ammonia leaks, very tough journeyman, working me very, very hard. And I worked my way through at the same time with a second job as a policy aide in the Texas Senate, briefing committees and really learning a lot about who I was as an individual as Ann Richards came in, shut the most ornate chapel down that was in any state house in America because of a problem of separation of church and state in her mind, and effectively passing in the first 6 months the franchise tax that we know today. And it shaped me in so many ways. But all along through that period, my dad was back at home, busted and broken and very defeated. And so when I left college, I went into law school, and I called one day to the owner of that judgment. I called the owner of basically a banker in Victoria, Texas, that had bought the judgment from the federal government. And he said, sure, you can get a release for your dad out from under that judgment. It's $700,000, cash or credit. And I said, well, I have $5,000 to my name. I'm selling land on the weekends. I'm working 18 hours a week for the Oklahoma Attorney General writing briefs, and I'm taking 18 hours a semester. I need to figure out a way to work this out. And they called me back in 6 months and said $300,000. They called me back in 8 more months and said $100,000. And they called me back in 90 days and said, we'll take 10 grand. So I met my dad on Christmas break at a Denny's, and I slid a Christmas card and a release on that judgment across the table. And he stared at it for 30 minutes, not understanding or believing or even having a concept of how a 25-year-old could have figured out how to lift the burden off of him in that kind of way. And he was released from that in a new person. It changed his life forever from that day forward. And a few years later, he developed leukemia and only found out about it in the 4th stage, so he couldn't fight it. But that changed his life in the last few years of his life, and it was a tremendous impact on me because what he taught me and what he instilled in me ultimately turned him around in ways that were very powerful. And I used that grit and that tenacity in the legislature, and I used it in fighting on our behalf. And when I came into the legislature, I was an underdog. I had run against a state representative that I felt did not represent the conservative pulse of Montgomery County, and everyone here in the establishment came against me. I couldn't get an endorsement if I would have begged for it in every way. I mean, I couldn't hardly get my 4th grade teacher to go against this powerful state representative, even though she really wanted to. But I had a lot of what people call closet support. And it was a movement all in and of itself because I had about 50 couples in their 20s and 30s with their kids showing up at everything I had, walking doors and volunteering during the week, taking off work, doing everything it took to build what became a grassroots machine that ultimately helped me years later. But I lost that race, that first race against that incumbent state rep, with everyone against me. And it was one of the greatest experiences I had. And I think that it's okay for us to offer our time for public service for the right cause and not worry about the loss. And it built a lot of character and confidence in me, knowing that I was on the right track. When I ran 4 years later, when he came home to retire, the state Republican Party of Texas sued me to kick me off the ballot. Tina Benkaiser, the chair of the Republican Party of Texas, went after me and did not drop her concerns of me challenging the establishment 4 years before with one of her closest friends, who ultimately ended up beating me. But Fawn and I worked every day, day in and day out, for the right reasons, and we finished with the most respect, and we banked a lot of support going into that term and that campaign 4 years later. The state Republican Party sued me under the pretext of my groundwater district service, even though I had resigned from that seat. The term that I was in overlapped with the future state representative term. So they came up with arguments that were just a pretext to punish me for fighting the establishment and standing up for conservatives. And we got certified on the ballot. We won at the district court level. We put it back on the Republican Party of Texas to continue suing us and fighting us till the very end, and we won. And we were effectively able to take the seat over a school board president, over a chamber president, over a very wealthy insurance broker who was the son of a popular district judge, his son-in-law. And I have never felt anything different in my tenure than working against the grain of what the establishment status quo has to offer. Coming into the legislature, I fought for sovereignty, and I fought to reduce the franchise tax, and I fought to reduce spending with our state budget that was bloated and out of control. And I fought for Tom Craddock, who was a good man and one of our strongest conservative leaders, as he took the gavel to be our first Speaker of the House, Republican Speaker of the House since Reconstruction. And I stayed with him all the way down to the bottom when the Cardinals got Joe Strauss elected with the Democrat support. And when I came into the House, it was 76 Republicans and 74 Democrats, with 3 Republicans always voting with the Democrats. You get the math there? It was a tough place to be, and I was called Ride of Attila the Hun, and I was called crazy. And let me tell you, every state representative in the Republican caucus, no matter who they are, if you ask them, are you a conservative? Their answer is yes. And when you ask them about the guy or the woman just to the right of them, they'll say, well, they're crazy. All the way across the pendulum. And let me tell you, I've always stayed all the way across on the right side. Case in point, in 2011, Ken Paxton was our #1 Republican voting scorer. on a Rice matrix all the way across 150 House members, Republican to Democrat. I was number 11, and there was less than 1/2 of a thousandth of a point to separate us. So we are talking about conservative bona fides and conservative credentials, but the underdog status and the true grit that I was taught, and fighting not just to fight and not just to say no, but turning people around and building a consensus that will reach beyond those that only identify with the Tea Party and only identify with conservative grassroots, and really, for that matter, identify with any party in and of itself. Because we've got a culture fight on our hands. We've got a fight for the future of Texas and the soul of America. And it is right now. It's not tomorrow. It's not the long game over the next 10 years. The crossroads is right before us. As we saw, 100 million taxpayers get overrun by 60 million entitlement recipients, where handout won out over hard work in the last 2 presidential election cycles defining America going forward. And who are we as Texans, and what do we expect out of the most important political seat in America? Our founders did not originally allow our Texas senators to choose our United States senators for no reason. It wasn't that they did not know what they were doing. The last stand for Texas sovereignty and states' rights is the Texas legislature. After Craddock was unseated, Joe Strauss gave me committees like you would never imagine, because I was very influential in the grassroots movement. I was not there just to say no. I was not there just to be a niche candidate or to pick a fight or to hope that we could just grow numbers over time. I was there to do things that moment, that time, seize the moment, and we were able to do it. But Joe Strauss giving me appropriations, giving me natural resources because I had a lake in my district, the Cardinals allowing me to serve on the stimulus subcommittee to cut the budget more than we have cut it since World War II with success, and to create a brand new baseline for conservatives to work off of. And ultimately giving me calendars, which many of you know the calendars committee are the gatekeepers for what legislation gets to the floor and what legislation does not. And every session after he knew that I could not be bought off, every session that we had candidates oppose Joe Strauss until the time to take the vote, and then they decided not to actually have a speaker's race on the House floor. Every session I was stripped of those committees. I lost appropriations. I lost calendars. I lost the subcommittee statuses. I lost my most important committee for District 16 in Montgomery County, natural resources, developing water solutions for the future. And at the last minute, with the help of the grassroots conservative freshman class, I ran for caucus chair against the moderate and the established leader's choice. And going into that election on the UT campus off of the Capitol grounds, it was about a split vote in our caucus of 95. And I turned the roof upside down and lit it up in 4 minutes. And that vote was 80-11, defining the future of the rest of the session being led by conservatives instead of the speaker's lieutenants. What do you do with that authority? Do you go along and get along? What do you do with the authority? Do you enjoy the title? Do you go to another party you're invited to? Do you go home and brag about it? To me, it's not always been about who takes the credit. It's about building the consensus and building the movement forward. And thank God we've got the help that you have established on the ground to continue to send us the conservatives we need to make this change. But we're not done. And I went into the caucus and I called for all of our members to come together for what I believe were 2 defining moments in my tenure as state representative. And what I'm referring to is the Medicaid expansion effort under Obamacare and making sure that was blocked going forward in the future. Medicaid is a subject that we all talk about, but it's not necessarily a subject that we identify with on the success of the grassroots movement. And I want to tell you, the most unsustainable part of Obamacare is the Medicaid expansion for the states and whether or not they will accept these policies going forward. And the shining light, we were all so defeated after John Roberts on the Supreme Court went the other direction, right?
Right.
I mean, that was amazing to me. I would have bet my mortgage on it if we could have counted on that. But the shining light in that holding and the promise for America for the future is that the 10th Amendment that I've been fighting for, and some have said, well, that's just a resolution, Brandon. Well, you know, yes, you carried the Texas Sovereignty Resolution in '09, and yes, you know, all Republicans are running on it, but it's just a resolution. What does that mean? That fight from '09 all the way to this session in 13, the very crux of the holding was that states could adopt under states' rights Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, or they could reject it. And during this session, 23 states had already folded, already thrown their cards on the table. They had already thrown their hands in the air and said, Obama, you win. Define us for the future going forward. We're on the dole. Talk about the soul of America giving up. And all the rest of the states, over half the nation, was looking at Texas. So I dusted off the bylaws. I brought every Republican caucus member into the caucus chambers, even with half of them saying, please don't do this. And I called for a vote and accountability with each of our Republican members. And a lot of them didn't show up to the vote, as you might know. Many of them probably didn't walk away. They probably took off running. And we have 95 members. The vote was 80-1. And surprisingly enough, you know, we had the head count that we needed. And Strauss was so upset with me, and the lieutenants were so upset with me, that they did what always happens. They put the liberal media on me the very next morning. Called me up to his chambers in the hallway of the Speaker's Hall. I got bombarded by about 13 microphones in a bright light that I was not expecting. But what we said was, the Speaker is saying we have our head in the sand as a party. We need to accept the hundreds of millions of dollars that is guaranteed for 3 years. And in perpetuity, foot the bill in the billions on that unsustainable growth forever as Texans. And I said, no, we will say no, we will draw the line, we will not bend, we will have a backbone, and we will demand accountability by Republicans on this issue. The Speaker's team and the moderate Republicans across Texas, they don't want to mess with the franchise tax. They wanted to give driver's license to illegal immigrants this session to counter what we did the prior session by requiring birth certificates for identification. They don't want to mess with the status quo. They don't want to hurt the feelings of the Democrats because they feel they need them. That's the accountability issue that's wrong in the Texas House. And the Texas Senate might be worse. But that's what's wrong in the Texas House. And that's what I fought time and time again to bring sunshine to. Don't we all say we need accountability? And don't we all say we need leaders with backbone that stand for something? When I went to the House floor on loser pays, tort reform, that small business bill was given by the Federal Reserve Chair as one of the top 3 reasons Texas survived the recession. Because when frivolous lawsuits are brought against businesses, but yet the person bringing the suit, trying to game a check from the insurance company, and the trial lawyers behind that effort making hundreds of millions of dollars to fund Battleground Texas with those frivolous lawsuits, when there's accountability there, and their side may have to pay everyone's legal fees, then there is accountability across this country for our judicial system. And there's accountability across this state for businesses that are working hard every day to create jobs. It's the name of the game. Job creation is the future of Texas. To make sure that they have a say, that they have a day in court, that they have a chance. And when I was on the House floor, I used a parliamentary rule called calling the previous question that had not been used as a rule on the House floor since 1988. And the reason why it had not been used is it suspends debate, it suspends amendments, it suspends everything going on the floor and says, stand up or sit down, push yes or push no, where are you on this subject? And one of the Republican members that had been in the House for 14 years came up to me after that and said, he had tears in his eyes, and he said, I have been waiting on someone to walk into this chamber and fight for our principles and to use that particular rule, no matter whose feelings it hurts, no matter what the repercussions were for punishment, no matter what happened, to stand up to the liberals and the Democrats that have been pushing conservatives around for decades. Trey Martinez Fisher, that works for Steve Austin, one of the top contributor for Battleground Texas, when he was at the back mic and I called the previous question, he threw his book at me all the way across the chamber, and it smashed against one of the ornate historic blinds in the House chamber and broke the hinge off of it. Craig Island, one of the top Democrat trial lawyers, stood at the back mic and hounded me over and over again for how oppressive that was in nature for conservatives to actually use the rules against the Democrats that had killed sonogram, that had killed our Texas budget, that had killed sanctuary cities, that had killed border security funding, that had killed loser pay, that had killed 10th Amendment state sovereignty, all on the rules and all on points of order. And we got them all back on track and passed all of them. But this particular measure would not have happened that day unless we coalesced and someone with some backbone, with some knowledge of the parliamentary rules, stood up for the conservative cause. And I want to talk about Medicaid expansion, a little bit more, because two examples that were sweeping reforms for Texas was the loser pay bill and was blocking Medicaid expansion. And I just want to say that as the rest of the nation looks at Texas, and as we all look at who defines Texas and who is next to state the case and be the voice and be the senator in Senate District 4 that will change the Senate, that will back up Dan Patrick. His senior advisor is my senior advisor. We share the same resources and the same team and the same concerted effort in working as he authored my sovereignty bill in the Senate. He calls and asks me every session, how can I help with the bills that you're carrying advance in the Senate, because I know you will get them done. The Lieutenant Governor of Texas is going to be in a bind with experience and people that actually know effectively how to move the dial for conservatives. Governor Abbott is not going to be able to sign any policy if the Texas senator doesn't get it to his desk. Ken Paxton is not going to be able to defend our laws as Attorney General if the Texas senator does not get it into the books and make sure it's law to defend. That's how this works, folks. And it's so important for this decision to be made. We've got a great field. We've got good people. We've got good guys. We've got people that this PAC has supported and that the grassroots movement in Montgomery County has acknowledged as leaders. So we have similarities, but the distinctions are clear. And we have to choose the person that will advance the cause, that can bring others into the fold, that can make people that don't really align with conservative beliefs consider and come to the table and stay at the table and vote for something like Medicaid expansion when ultimately they never would, even as Republicans. Because this is for the fight for the soul of the future of Texas, defined by what conservatives and Republicans, if they call themselves Republicans, ultimately decide. My dad never took a bailout. He never had any help and never took any assistance. He fought on his own, time and time again, and he instilled that in me. And I have worked every chance I've gotten with great success, and I've challenged the very people that are the core and the root of the problem in state government in pushing back on the conservative movement, and I've continued to win against the odds. And I need your help. I need you to be with me, united with me, and working, not just helping and supporting, but working to help us advance this effort, because the Senate seat is too important to forsake. This isn't a popularity contest. We've got really good people running. This is about the future of Texas and who is going to back up the next lieutenant governor and the next attorney general for this state. And I'm asking you to join me. And I'm asking you to join Fawn. And I'm asking you to fight the fight with me that I've been fighting for Montgomery County since I've been in office. And I've been turned back and challenged and tripped in every way, shape, or form you could imagine. And I've gotten back up, dusted myself off, and continued with your support to get it done. So I want to save some time for questions. But I want to say that the fight is not here. It's out there. And as Ted Cruz fights on behalf of filibustering Obamacare, and I fight on behalf of Texas to block the largest provision in that bill, and Obama continues to run us down this path, how are we going to define ourselves for the future? We can do it together, but I need your help to stand with me, to join me in this effort, and to never look back, to never look in the rearview mirror, and to take the PAC's success across this state. And I can help you build the membership, I can help you build the cause, and together we can make it happen for Senate District 4. Thank you very much. You want to use the move? Yeah, that'd be great. I would like to. Yeah. How much time do we have? Because that's what it's all about. Okay. I'd like to. Thank you. You think through the audio, everybody can hear me? Yes. Great.
Best state to start a business and raise a family. It is the last stand for liberty against an out-of-control, overreaching federal government. Texas Fight for Liberty took a Montgomery County representative with bold ideas who wasn't willing to just sit in a corner and accept the status quo. And when Brandon took office, he was on a mission to fight the establishment, to represent what would become the pulse of the modern grassroots conservative movement in Texas. Brandon was an author of the bill that put "under God" in the Texas Pledge. And Brandon authored Texas 10th Amendment legislation to stand up and uphold Texas state rights. He received national acclaim for this effort and started a grass fire among grassroots conservatives. He passed this through the Texas House with the support of conservatives like Brian Hughes and against fierce liberal opposition. 37 states followed Texas's lead.
This time, it's my pleasure to introduce the governor of the great state of Texas, Governor Rick Perry.
Brandon, thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your initiative to introduce a piece of legislation that I believe is going to be a wake-up call, not just for Texas, but for this entire nation.
As Obama and the rest of Washington's elite forced the failed stimulus package down our throats, Brandon continued his fight. Brandon volunteered for a special committee to deal with the disaster that was the stimulus package. He volunteered to ensure liberals in Washington did not dictate to Texans how to run Texas. He led conservatives in the fight to prevent Texas from being held hostage by federal money that comes with strings attached, by rejecting portions of the stimulus. Other states soon followed his lead. He then successfully fought to get a committee created solely to fight against federal intrusion, the State Sovereignty Committee.
To me, it doesn't matter who is in leadership in Washington. I'm speaking from the state of Texas. in making sure that DC gets the point and Texas hears us loud and proud too.
which served as a vehicle for conservatives to promote their agenda to end federal overreach. Creighton passed a bill to nullify Obamacare through this committee. Brandon's next battle was to take on trial lawyers by authoring and passing the most significant tort reform legislation since medical malpractice. National economists proclaimed this victory as the reason Texas was able to recover from the recession faster than any other state. Brandon united conservatives to get this accomplished. Finally, this past session, as Speaker Joe Straus was unanimously elected Speaker of the House by all 150 representatives, Brandon rallied conservatives and was elected to lead the largest Republican caucus in the nation. As the leader of the conservatives, Brandon passed a bill to require drug testing for individuals seeking unemployment welfare benefits. But more importantly, Brandon led the charge to stop the expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare in Texas, saving taxpayers billions.
Is the effect of your motion to say to each individual conferee, you cannot vote for something like that? Yes.
Unflinching conservative values and fearless leadership made Brandon the most effective legislator standing up for the conservative movement. Brandon Creighton is more than just words on a pushcart. Brandon has passed into law significant pieces of legislation. He is substance, not just rhetoric.
The choices Texas voters make today will shape the Texas of tomorrow. To know where you want to go, you have to know where you've been. And everyone here, is part of what makes Texas great. There is a lot of work to be done. I've never backed down from a fight. It's not in my DNA. It's not in yours either. So will you stand with me? Will you stand with the next generation of Texas leaders that will never quit fighting for Texas? Will you fight for me for liberty, for economic freedom, for Texas?
Yes, Steve. March 8th, I'm walking off the floor. We had convened an hour or two earlier. And as I'm walking off the floor, the speaker's coming at me in the opposite direction. He's got a blue button down and he's looking very casual and he's coming my way. And I said, "Hey, Mr. Speaker, looking casual, looks good." And he said, "I like it that way." It's all I really said, a big smile on his face. And then my phone goes off. Reach in my pocket, pull it out, it's Brandon. And man, was he mad. He was just fit to be tied. I've never heard you so mad before. And he said, "I just got off the phone with the speaker." And I said, "I just saw him." And he said, in the trib, he said, "We cannot just say no to the expansion of Medicaid." And he said, to the speaker, he said, "Oh yes, we can." That's the kind of leadership that we need in Austin.
Okay, is it on? All right. I want to save time for questions. And I included Steve's commentary in there because Steve and I have worked together very well. And I put my arm around Steve. Steve, I helped you in every regard that I could to make sure you came home and had strong accomplishments as we co-sponsored C-Scope together to the firearm bill that I rerouted through my committee to make sure it even had a hearing. And I put him on the policy committee under my leadership on the caucus to make sure that we had a policy committee that was full of conservatives, that we could call out with exposure what was going on in the backroom shady deals at the Capitol. And together we got it done. And ultimately to make sure that he could come home and be a success. So I want to take questions, and I want to offer any amount of time that you think is important for any questions that are on your mind, because that's what it's all about, right? So hopefully I was comprehensive and I covered some good ground. But tell me, Walter, you always have a question. Come on, man.
I darn sure do.
All right, man.
Hey, by the way, I was in Huntsville today, and you're in the paper here. You're supposed to speak a week from Thursday at the University of Sam Houston on emotional intelligence. Did you know that?
I did.
All right.
Yeah.
You know about emotion?
I do.
All right.
I'm passionate.
Hey,
Lieutenant Governor, soon to be Lieutenant Governor-elect Dan Patrick, myself, Ken Paxton, many other conservative leaders are going to talk to the youth on a college campus. What's better than that across the state, right? I know, but you gave me a great segue,
I know
Walter.
I did. Okay, here's the deal. Let's talk practical politics. This endorsement, Dr. Julie and this clique here, I'm sorry, not a clique. But anyway, they have a lot of power. You know you're gonna have a difficulty getting this endorsement, I think. Now, you saw what happened in the race for county judge, where my candidate, the lady, was squeezed out between the establishment and the Tea Parties and the religious faction. What are you going to do about, and Bunch may get the establishment, where do you fit in this? And I'll add one other ingredient, because the Democrats are going to be voting in this, and they probably have 20 to 30% of the vote here. So we have a vote, and we've discussed this race. So how are you going to put together something that, besides the excellent thing you did today, that was a good speech, but how are you going to put together a winning combination to win this election?
Walter, it's a great question, and as a Tea Party Democrat, I'm asking for your vote. I hope I have it. It's an open ballot, and let me tell you, your vote is no less important than anyone else's to me personally, and I'm working to earn it every day, and I don't in any way think that I'm not right there competing at the top level for the Patriot PAC support, and I'm fighting to earn every single ounce of that support. So that was part of my talk today, was talking about being an effective conservative to move the movement in a way that has consequences. And it's very clear in this candidate field in making a choice for the future on who can do that based on not rhetoric but on performance. So I have one of the largest, most successful Tea Parties in the state, Kingwood Tea Party, that was one of the first to get behind Ted Cruz. And I'm very proud of that. I've got the support of the East Montgomery County Tea Party, and to date I've got more Tea Parties than anyone on the candidate slate on SD4. So I'm very, very excited about building the consensus that I'm talking about. Because the grassroots conservatives that identify with the Tea Party, it may be 15 to 30% of Texas. Who's going to state the case in the best way to bring everyone else into the fold? Because folks, if we don't do that, we are not going to accomplish our goals. And Senator Cruz at the national level, and your next SD4 senator can articulate the message, knows the parliamentary procedures to fight the liberals, can back up Dan Patrick as lieutenant governor, and get bills to the desk of Greg Abbott that ultimately will be defended by Ken Paxton. That is what we're talking about here today. And I think that I am running a grassroots campaign, Walter, across 5 counties, not just right here in Montgomery County, walking 5-mile radiuses with Samsung smart tablets and giving the kind of data and information to voters that will ultimately inspire them to turn out in a measurable way that will lead to success. And we're polling excellent, way out in front of the field in that regard, and we're going to continue to build on that, and I'm asking the PAC to join me in that effort. So thank you for that question. Next.
You said you were caucus chair. What was it that you did as caucus chair? The policy meetings, what was that? And how did that work? Why was that effective?
The caucus chair position, and the reason why many asked me to reconsider taking on that obligation, was it is the work of 10 state representatives. You have to carry your own legislative agenda for your district, but you were involved in every outcome and advance for the conservative movement and what the goals of the caucus are, compared to the cardinals, the chairman, the Strauss lieutenants, and everything that is working in that committee process. And it is a tremendous amount of workload. So your question is, as caucus chair, what were the constraints on my time? And the policy committee that I established as caucus chair and appointed Steve to be on, as well as so many other very effective new members of the legislature, was set up as an accountability measure by me as the new chairman, where we actually had members reading the bills. And yes, that's right, Robin, right? So we actually had members reading the bills and exploiting what details were hidden in those bills that could derail an effort or that could prevent us blindly following what leadership was saying to do on the House floor. And we were able to amend those bills and substitute those bills and delay those bills that were Republican moderate bills in ways that effectively brought the kind of change we needed. And folks, let me tell you, we ended the session with a lot of challenges. And we ended the session with unbridled spending. It's why I'm the first caucus chair in decades to vote against the state budget. Out of every Republican that leadership wanted to tar and feather, that was the final, backbreaker by exploiting what ultimately was a very, very few people that were Strauss appointees to negotiate that budget with Tommy Williams in the Senate. And I tied their hands in a way that they could not adopt Medicaid expansion, and then signified voting no because there was not border security funding, and there was a pension increase for legislators, and there was $6 billion more in the Senate budget than there was in the House budget. And I said no. Yes, Jim.
Who are the Cardinals that you're talking about?
Well, the original 12, which many have either been retired or decided to retire, but the original 12 Republicans that got together with the Democratic caucus to elect Strauss are right now the most powerful committee chairs. So when Jim Pitts over the House budget, when he got a letter from me signed by Steve and the other policy committee members that I had signed the letter saying you will not negotiate on Medicaid expansion or we're going to blow this up across Texas, he was just astounded that anyone in the Republican Party and in the Republican caucus, especially me, would publicly out them in such a way that he didn't know how to respond to it. All he had in response is, well, we're going to do that and we were planning on it. It wasn't your idea. And that's all they could come up with. Yeah. So when the number one grassroots movement goal and priority coming into the session was accomplished, I can guarantee you that the Cardinals that lead state affairs and that lead calendars and that lead appropriations, all of the power in the House, they're the ones that are trying to maneuver the process to game the system on what effective outcome ends up happening. They played the games with the pro-life bills. They played the games with the Second Amendment bills, and they played the games with the budget. And we turned it around time and time again with success. Yes?
How many more of those have you got to do?
Well, Steve and I watched, as many of you did, on some chairmen that were challenged by the conservative grassroots and Michael Quinn Sullivan and many others that were trying to make a change on retiring the rest of these Cardinals. And, some of them barely won, but it showed major momentum with tremendous resources to their advantage,
There are 5 left.
Yeah. And so what we have is the more relevant question, which is not are there 5 left? The more relevant question is who took their place? Who took their place? Because let me tell you, when a cardinal goes, another cardinal's anointed. And the leadership structure in the House, Scott Turner is an incredible Christian man. He sat right beside me all session. We prayed together all session. We worked together all session. And he is fighting this fight to get the word out across Texas that we need new leadership in the House.
Speaking of Scott Turner, what do you think of his proposed bid for speaker?
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Scott leading the effort to.
How do you think he'll?
I think that the math, with the Democrats in play, I think the math favors Joe Strauss. But I think what Scott will do, different than the other individuals that contested the speaker in the past, is Scott will go to the floor for a vote. And that is a speaker's race. No, Senator Williams, in my understanding, has gone on to A&M and is just commuting. I don't even think he's at play in this endeavor whatsoever.
He won't even speak to us anymore.
I may be wrong, but there's obviously, in Senator Williams' time in the House, when I blocked the San Jacinto River Authority bill, where they had to go contract with every water provider to do what they want to do with this RAP plan, and voting against the budget this time around, which he was the architect. He's been very frustrated with me in several different obvious situations that we're talking about. So I hope that Senator Williams, I hope for the best for him, but in this race, I think we're all standing on our own 2 feet. Yeah. Yes, Jim?
I wish Senator West all the best too. Great decision. I told you to leave, I got him on it. Tell us what sets you apart from those candidates.
You know, what sets me apart from the rest of the field, and we've talked about, we have good people, we have good conservatives, we have successful businessmen all the way across the board. What sets me apart from the rest of the field is the ability to effectively communicate and articulate the conservative message to bring others into consensus and to be effective in making sure that the policy outcomes are meaningful. Because we don't want more bills. We don't want more laws on the books. We don't want more policy unless it's a health care compact that fights Obamacare. Right? Unless it's bringing loser pay, tort reform legislation to the floor that saves 80,000 businesses across this state from lawsuits. Unless it's a state sovereignty resolution reasserting our states' rights and holding my own colleagues accountable for states' rights and the knowledge of the Constitution and what it means to be a constitutional conservative. If we want those policies to advance as we remove meaningless laws from the books or just enforce what we've got, we have to have someone that's effective in the Senate because, folks, the Senate has been historically, even among our Republicans and our stalwarts, much more liberal or moderate in their scores and their matrices and their ultimate scorecards from the grassroots side of things than the House ever dreamed of being. And making sure that we send someone over there that's not just saying no, but affecting change is the clear distinction of my candidacy on this ballot based on proven performance. Yes. Yes.
What was your most frustrating moment in the legislature? And what frustrations do you think you will encounter if you are the next senator?
Great question. What was my most frustrating moment in the House and the legislature, and what will I think will be the most frustrating once I move over to the Senate? My most frustrating moment in the House was having people stand in the Republican caucus on our beliefs, our values, and our principles that all have promised you and all of their constituents what they stand for, to vote to block Medicaid 80-1, with many scurrying out the door hoping to not be held accountable for it. And then just a few weeks later, when I directed the House negotiators on the House floor to not negotiate on the issue, I led the charge and the vote was 77-68. I got it by one vote. I needed 76 majority to get it there. And the fact that we cannot stand in one room and espouse our principles and stand strong with backbone and then go out to the arena and hold true to those principles and those beliefs in our Constitution, it hurt me personally, because in a Caesarean way, you count on your brothers and sisters in Christ and those that are a part of the movement to be there for you. And I was almost standing alone again as I found myself several different sessions in this fight. But we got there. In the Senate.
Well, that's frustrating.
Maybe your microphone finally worked.
In the Senate, I think the most frustrating, I'm going to have to anticipate the frustration, but the most frustrating avenues in the Senate will be that we have very few Republican conservative senators that understand the rules and the parliamentary procedures and how to navigate. And the PAC can single-handedly help further a campaign to put someone in that position that will back up our next lieutenant governor in a meaningful way against trial lawyer after trial lawyer after trial lawyer that works in that body. And I look forward to the challenge. I cannot wait. thank everybody so much for the time. I know we went a little over, but this is so important, and together we can get it done. And I'm so proud of each and every one of you and our accomplishments here at home. We're going to take this across Texas very, very soon. Thank you.